Pesach's coming up, and we're here with Rabbi Nosson Scherman from Artscroll, one of the two founders from Artscroll. Rabbi Scherman, you're one of them, and Rabbi Zlotowitz.
He's the primary one, I'm the secondary one.
Secondary one. And you both started Artscroll and founded it back when?
1976.
1976. How did that happen? And how did you get
the bicentenary of the United States.
Bicentennial year. So how did it happen? Artscroll got going and things started moving.
Well, it happened almost by accident, meaning assuming that anything in this world can happen by accident. A very close friend of Reb Meir Zlotowitz, and Reb Meir Fogel, was a teacher in Torah Semis. I never knew him, but people who knew him, everyone considered him to be a best friend. He was that kind of person, a master mechanech. The children loved him. He passed away suddenly in his sleep, no warning. And Rabbi Zlotowitz wanted to do something in his memory. And he wanted it to be something, no, not just planting trees or putting on a plaque. He's a very imaginative person. He wanted it to be something different. And he had this vision, it was a few months before Purim, and he had this vision of doing a commentary, translation and commentary of Megillas Esther, and to finish it by the Shloshim. At that time I was a yeshiva menahel. I was a menahel of yeshiva in Mesivta, Carlin Stolin in Borough Park. And he asked me if I would edit, which I did. And he asked me if I would do an introduction, which we called an overview, and that's a name that caught on. And it was published about a month or so, a little bit more than a month before Purim. And it caught on. It caught on, it became very popular. Went through a couple of printings that very same year. About 20,000 copies were sold, which was unheard of in the Jewish publishing field. And it became obvious that there was a...
You had a recipe for success.
Well, you could call it that. Actually, you can go, to use the cliche, it was an idea whose time had come. What you had was this. You had a few generations of American men and women who grew up here, whose primary language was English, who had gone to yeshiva, gone to Mesivta, gone to Beis Yaakov. They could learn a pasuk with Rashi, but they couldn't read it. They could. It was difficult for them. They would do it. You know, people sat and learned. But here was something that they could pick up and read at their leisure, and get a very good idea of what the pasuk was saying, what the Mefarshim were saying.
Yeah.
And we were encouraged by Gedolei Yisrael, Reb Moshe Feinstein, Reb Yankov Kamenetsky, people like that, Rev Gifter, especially more than anyone else, because Rev Gifter was an American who read English, fluent in English, and they encouraged us to continue. So Rabbi Zlotowitz gave up his business, and I left the yeshiva, and we both, I would say we got engaged in this full-time. It was more than full-time. It was full-time and a half.
I understand that you have yourself a little bit of a diverse background. You grew up in New Jersey, and how did things get going for you?
I was born in Newark, New Jersey, and went to public school until I was 10 years old. There was no day school then in Newark. There was no day school. One started...
You came from a frum family?
Yeah, from Balabatisha family. We had a mom-and-pop grocery store.
But there was no going to a Jewish school?
There was no Jewish school.
Public school?
It was public school, that's all there was. The day school in Newark started, the Hebrew Academy of Newark started after I was already in public school, and they were always a year or two behind me. I was in 5th grade, their highest grade was 4th grade. So I was in public school. And my Zayda, Oliver Sholem, learned with me, and my father got me a Balama to learn with me, but it didn't amount to anything, really not. When I was 8 years old, Lubavitch Talmud Torah started in Newark. Reb Sholem Gordon, Zichron Livracha, a really great man. He founded it, and he built it up from nothing to over 200 children. And I started there when I was 8 years old. Took 2 buses to get there. You wouldn't let somebody today take 2 buses to get anywhere, especially since I did not live in the best neighborhood. And then the Talmud Torah moved, and it took me 2 buses. Took me about 30-35 minutes to get there. Going after school, coming home, usually after 8 o'clock at night. And I owe a lot to that Lubavitcher Talmud Torah, and especially to Reb Shalom Gordon. And when I was 8 years old, I went to Torah Das in the dormitory.
Did you keep in touch with Rabbi Gordon after that point in time?
Well, yes and no. After a couple of years, Lubavitch sent him to Springfield, Massachusetts, to start a yeshiva there. And unfortunately, the Newark Talmud Torah dwindled after that. Probably because the day school became more popular. But at any rate, he was away. But then later on, when I was not living in Newark anymore, I was in yeshiva in Monsey and then the Kollel, and living in Brooklyn. But afterwards, after the Kollel, Rabbi Gordon came back to the Newark area, and he lived across the street from my parents. So whenever I came home for a Shabbos, I would meet him again.
And that must have been very nice to,
It was really nice.
See where you had gone and where he had gone, and catch up on old times together.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A lot of people have, and you've told me this, have said ArtScroll may not print too much of this way or too much of that way, or a little bit of too much of this. Or how do you respond to that?
It's hard to respond because the question is not a legitimate question. Two things. First of all, and most important, we're not out to sell anything. We're not organization people. We're out to present the Torah the way it says and the way the Mefarshim explain it. That's all. That's all we're out to do. Now, secondly, obviously, any writer, myself included, all of our writers, we're talmidim of yeshivas. We have our rebbeim. We've been brought up in a certain method of learning. We have a certain hashkafa in life. So obviously, somebody will write the same way.
That they
some write that he grew up with. He'll write what his rebbeim taught him. But especially the first point is really the essential thing. We are not out to merchandise anything. We're not. We're out to explain the Torah the way we understand it, according to the way our rebbeim taught it to us. That's all.
And bring that in a public form.
Exactly.
So, to someone who would say that there is not enough mention this way or there's not enough mention that way.
The Torah is so rich. The Torah is so rich. Look, you can find Satmar Chassidim have, I think, more than a dozen Sfarim of Mamorim with the Satmar Rebbe. Chabad has, unlimited. Belz has, Ger has. There's so much. You can write on each parsha of the Chumash. On each parsha of the Chumash, Reb Shlomo Kluger, they found in his Ksavim some years ago. They found in his Ksavim on every parsha of the Chumash a separate sefer. A whole sefer has been published on each parsha of the Chumash. So you say, well, why don't you push this? Why don't you push that? Why don't you push that? There's no limit to what you can say. The Torah is limited. The Torah is infinite. So I once told somebody when I was young. One of my rebbeim told me. I asked him, what can I do in my free time? I'd like to enrich myself. It was Rav Pam, Zichron Livracha. And he said, learn Tanakh, learn Nevi'im Rishonim with Mitzudas. And I used to tell people afterwards, and I did that. I did it over the course of the year, and I was able to finish Nevi'im Rishonim. And I told somebody afterwards, you know why I like Mitzudas? Because Mitzudas is speaking to me. He explains the pasuk in a very clear and a very simple way, and that's what I need. So when I write and when I edit, my goal is to say something that the reader has to have. I'm not trying to impress him with how smart I am. I'm not that smart. I'm not trying to impress anybody. I want to put myself into the chair of the reader. What would he need? What would help him? What would inspire him? What would educate him? What questions would he have? How can I respond to his need? That's all. There's Sfarim that I use in my personal learning that are very deep. That are very deep. But that's not for the person who's interested in buying an ArtScroll book. If he's that much of a Talmud Chacham, he'll be learning the original.
Do you ever learn from any of the Sfarm of the, Bell, Satmar, Chabad, or any of these?
Of course I do. Of course I do. I mean, I nash from wherever I can.
But you have, you said before.
Let me give you an example. One of my rebbeim, the one who had the most influence on me, was Rabbi Nosson Scherman. He told he was an expert in Sfas Emes, but he knew everything. He knew everything, and he was phenomenal. Anybody who knew him just was absolutely amazed at how much he knew, and also how much he did not show it. His son told me that his father told him, whatever you say should be Sfas Emes. Don't quote the Sfas Emes, but your outlook should be Sfas Emes. And he told me his father told him, he looks at everything, he learns everything, but he always comes back to Sfas Emes. So are you going to say that somebody like Rav Shur would look down on anything else? Certainly not. Of course not. His Tchunas HaNefesh, where he felt the sefer that spoke to him, to his own personal kishreinis, his strengths and his weaknesses, was Sfas Emes more than anything else. Now, you can't translate Sfas Emes. I mean, I learn Sfas Emes all the time. You can't translate Sfas Emes. You can sometimes inject in your writing, in your speaking, a nugget, the essential theme of a Sfas Emes. But you can't. It's not translatable. You can't translate Sfas Emes into English. If you did, nobody would understand it, unless as an aid to help him go back to the original Sfas Emes and pick up some of the words and understand what they mean. But in our writing, I say our writing because all of us have the same goal. The goal is put yourself into the feet and the mind of the reader, of the one who's learning your sefer. What does he need? What would he appreciate? What would help him? That's the only thing that matters.
So how did you develop from one book to, what was the process? What did you do after your initial release to forward?
Well, we kept on working. We finished the 5 Megillas. Rabbi Zlotowitz started doing Chumash Bereshis with a really magnificent commentary. There's nothing else like it. And I continued editing, and I wrote the introductions.
One of your most famous things is the Stone Chumash.
Yeah. That came later. That came in the 1980s.
So that was already well into it.
Yeah, that came much well 18 years later from the beginning. Took a few years of work, but it was published in 1984. And we engaged Rabbi Yosef Elias, who was a very great man, really one of the pioneers of chinuch in America. We asked him to do a Haggadah. And that was the ArtScroll Haggadah. And as far as I'm concerned, it's probably the best Haggadah we ever did, and I think it's probably the best Haggadah that there is in English. In fact, I use it in my personal Seder. I've been using it all the years.
This is the original ArtScroll Haggadah?
This is the original ArtScroll Haggadah. It's a magnificent commentary, a lot of deep thought and hashkafa. The literary value is very good. And then we started doing Mishnayos, and the complete Mishnayos was finished just
last year.
Just last year. It's over 40 volumes. And we're starting now...
Yad Avraham.
Yad Avraham, right. And we're starting now to do it in Hebrew, in Lashon Kodesh.
So that's zone... Are you just translating the English translation backward?
No.
You're doing a different parish.
It's a new, different parish, a new concept. It'll be arranged in a very unique way. There'll be translation with additional phrases, sentences to make it clear. So if somebody's learning Mishnayos for Shloshim, let's say, or a teenager or young boys learning Mishnayos.
That's one of the things you do a lot throughout your Gemaras or series. Is a lot of times text will bring down 2 words and it's really 10 words there, and you just need those.
That's right. You need those words to fill in. And you need some introductory sentences too to explain what's going on, what to expect, what's happening. We have it in the Gemara, we have it in our Rashi, we have it in our Chumash Ramban, and we'll be doing that in the Hebrew Mishnayos. So that'll be...
It was interesting. I was just over Shabbos using your recent release of your Shulchan Aruch, and it was like 2 words on the page, and I'm looking at the translation, how many words you put in there, and it was something like additional 10 or 12 words just to fill in 2 words. You make it a point in your Sfarim to add on so much that's not there, just to make it so much more understood.
Yes, because a sefer...
As I say, read in between the lines.
Yeah, but a sefer by its very nature, they're not married. The Gemara is just... Well, there was the Sonsino translation of the Shas, which came out many, many years ago. An excellent translation, but it's a literary translation. I mean, a literate translation. And you can't understand the flow of the Kasha, the Teretz, the reasoning of the Gemara. So just translation enough is not nearly enough. A literal translation of Rashi will not help you to really understand what Rashi is trying to say. And Ramban, which is more difficult than Rashi, certainly not. It's interesting you mentioned the Shulchan Aruch, Kitzur Shulchan Aruch. It's been reprinted since it was first published about 150 years ago. It's been reprinted scores of times, maybe probably more than 100 times.
Yeah.
There are commentaries on it. I think it's a very unappreciated sefer.
Because it's the bread and butter of Yiddishkeit.
And for 100 years it was. Now, well, until our Shulchan Aruch came along, until our treatment of the Kitzur came along, it was virtually not used, which is a shame, really a tragedy, because there's so much there. This Rav Gansried,
as it is, it's the laid out table.
Yeah, Rav Gansried, who composed it, you know, a Talmud Chacham, who knows Dalet Chelkei Shulchan Aruch, with the Mefarshim, with the Nosei Kelim, looks at the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, and he's amazed at how much he was able to compress into a few sentences. And with our Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, we've tried to bring it to life. An additional feature is that it also has the psakim of the Mishnah Brura, where they disagree with the Kitzur, and of Rabbi Moshe Feinstein from Igros Moshe. So that makes it more valuable for, you could call it the yeshiva world, let's say.
Yeah.
Which would follow Mishnah Brura and would follow Rabbi Moshe. So they have the best of all worlds. They have the Kitzur Shulchan Aruch, and they have the Mishnah Brura, and they have Igros Moshe.
So you get the best of everyone over there.
Well, that's what we try to do, and there's a magnificent team of Talmidei Chachamim, writers, editors, which we've been able, Baruch Hashem, to assemble over the years. And they're able to do justice to whatever they touch.
Well, thank you, Rabbi Scherman, so much for your time, and we wish you a kosher Freilich and Pesach, and all the best doing your work here in Artscroll.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you.
All tough.